Final Fantasy XIV has so many antagonistic characters that it's genuinely difficult to compile them all into a tier list. But, at least with the MSQ characters, from A Realm Reborn all the way to Dawntrail, we can give it a damn good go. Hi there everyone, welcome back to the channel. My name is Joesephyr and today we'll be taking a look at all of the major antagonists in Final Fantasy XIV. I've had this video requested quite a lot after how successful my tier list was on the villains of the Final Fantasy series as a whole, so I figure why not get more specific and jump into the richness of Final Fantasy XIV. So, some ground rules here. This video is very much intended to be a bit of fun and I fully expect that everyone will have different opinions on this, which is testament to how good Final Fantasy XIV's writing is. My favourites may not be the same as yours and I'll be bringing in opinions from others periodically throughout the video as well, so you can see who you agree with most out of both mine and my friends and Patreon members. I think I have all of the major villains here for the MSQ, but do forgive me if I've missed any in particular, and for obvious reasons, I will be discussing the story up until 7.3 in Dawntrail, so big ol' spoiler warning for anyone going into this video if you haven't finished all of that in Final Fantasy XIV yet. I've not gone into side content like raids or large-scale side stories, so you won't see the likes of Valens or Athena here. I have, however, given a nod to 1.0 though, with Nail's presence on this list, more to show respect for the legacy players than anything else. I shall leave the tier maker link down in the description box below so you can have some fun with this yourself. By all means, feel free to post yours in the comments, and with those comments, do keep it cute and keep it classy. Now this is going to be a big video, so grab a snack and a drink and let's just get started. I think we should start on a high note. Now, I'm not going to go into this with any particular order in mind, mainly to keep you guessing, but I think it's fairly safe to say that Emet-Selch is going to be at the top of most people's lists, so we'll start with him because I am no different. Shadowbringers is the strongest of all the expansions in Final Fantasy XIV in my opinion, and Emet-Selch is a big reason as to why. Emet-Selch has all of the traits of a brilliant villain. He's charismatic, he's charming, he's diabolical in the scale of his actions, and he makes the player feel something strongly, which is a trait I consider very important in a tier list like this. All roads up until Shadowbringers lead to Emet, the Garlean Empire, the Ascians, the Primals, all of it. He sits at the pinnacle from the moment we are introduced to him as Solus Zos Galvus. Emet-Selch has had many players questioning themselves as to whether they consider him a villain at all and sympathise with his desire to simply return home to his people, and find his drive and determination to do that by any means necessary admirable. This is obviously bolstered by his role in Endwalker. I, however, still very much consider him a villain, as whether people like to see it or not, he is quite happy to commit genocide to further his goals because he considers the people he's hurting not worthy of his attention. He thinks of the Ascian race as superior beings, and whether you think he's right about that or not, I still think he's pretty atrocious in his actions, despite what he does in Endwalker, who could almost be considered a separate character entirely. They are time displaced after all. None of that makes him any less of a brilliantly written character though. He's also a fantastic boss fight as Hades. I would honestly struggle to find anyone who doesn't put Emet in S tier. He's not just the most loved villain in Final Fantasy XIV, but nowadays, the entire Final Fantasy history book. Okay, so we can only go down from here, sadly. So coming down from Emet, I want to move back into A Realm Reborn and discuss some of the villains there. Predominantly the Ascians, La Habrea, Nabriales, and Igiorm. Starting with Igiorm, it's really hard not to put her in the bottom tier, mainly because she has so little presence in the story compared to literally every other Ascian in the game. She's mostly just a device for other characters like the other two Realm Reborn Ascians I've mentioned here, not Elidibus, he comes later, Thordan and Golbez, and even the way she goes out is underwhelming, so I'm quite happy to put her in D tier. Nabriales sadly doesn't really fare much better, but he does have a few extra points going for him. He's the catalyst for both Minfilia and Moanbreeder's story, but like Igiorm, his presence is kinda forgotten about pretty quickly after Heavensward starts. He's very much emblematic of the patch content between Realm Reborn and 3.0, which is Heavensward's start, which is the part of the game that most players, myself included, fell off of pretty hard. So he can't have been that interesting, and so because of that, I'm still going to put him in D tier along with Igiorm, because while Moanbreeder's arc ended with him, she's way more noteworthy than he is. Now, La Habrea is an interesting one, because he's very much the primary villain for all of A Realm Reborn, and his actions have had ramifications throughout the rest of the game. He sets the tone for villains in Final Fantasy XIV, but yeah, I can't help but think he doesn't do a particularly good job of it. I low-key love La Habrea, but I do so because I love his campiness and his silliness, particularly while he's possessing Thancred during the Ultimate Weapon sequences. I kind of feel like Ascian Prime, which was the fusion of him and Igiorm, was also a bit of a letdown, and while La Habrea does get some extra backstory alongside the Heart of Sabik, which itself is barely mentioned after Ultimate Weapon in the Pandemonium raids, upgrades, that still doesn't really pull him out into being something super noteworthy as a villain. Certainly not in the way that Gaius got a redemption arc from the same storyline anyway. He does, however, set up the wheels in motion for literally everything that happens after him, even if he's not particularly involved in many of the events that he sets up. So I can't say he's an outright bad villain, and he does still make me giggle to this day, so I'm actually kind of happy just to put him square in the middle. So now let's jump forward to Dawntrail for a while and talk about Bakul Jaja and Zoralja. I'm going to be straight with you all, Dawntrail's story overall left me feeling very wanting, so much so that it put me off playing 14 altogether for a while, and the lack of strong villains is a big part of why. Well, that and trying to obtain the Platinum Trophy for Final Fantasy XIV on PS5. Don't do that to yourself if you want to continue to love the game, I'm telling you. I've done it, it's not worth the sacrifice. Bakul Jaja, D tier, straight up. It's really hard to take a character who's that thuggish and brash seriously, even during their feel sorry for me moment of survivor's guilt when he's just released Valeg Armanda from prison, a being that would have destroyed the entire area and rendered his motives completely moot. His flip turn into a less villainous character just served to make him even more annoying, so I'm sorry. I know he's somewhat popular with Dawntrail fans, but he's lining the bottom of the barrel with the Ascians for me. Zoralja is slightly better, but not by much. I say this for one reason and one reason only. Zoralja made me feel strongly against him purely for the treatment of his son Gululja. The rejection he showed him at least made me want to beat him, certainly more than it did when he attacked his father Gululja Jar using his Deus Ex Machina revival machine. Now Deus Ex Machina is a trend I strongly dislike in stories in general, as you'll see during this video. So I think I'm going to put Zoralja in C tier. I think he's a bit of a rubbish character, but at least his boss fight was good fun, I'll give him that. Going for something of a bit of a different angle, I want to talk about a villain you never actually fight, which is Teleji Adeleji. Now, I actually think he's a significantly better in the post 2.0 story than the Ascians were. I say this as someone who's a big fan of mortal characters being the pains in the backside through political intrigue and deception. I am a Final Fantasy Tactics fan after all, and I think Teleji stands out in this regard very well. The cutscene of the assassination of Nanamo was pretty shocking at the time, and his plot to frame the player was interesting. He's a character who wants to rise to power the dirty way, and that makes me think he's actually a really good villain. I could have also put Lolorito here, actually, thinking about it. He was trying to get Teleji and Raoban to kill each other after all, but he doesn't really play villain in the same way that Teleji does. But maybe I should have put Lolorito in here. You guys let me know in the comments what you think. Even though he doesn't actually live all that long, Teleji's actions far outlast him, extending into the Omega story arc and then Stormblood thanks to the Alamegan story, so I think he's one of the more underrated villains. I'm going to pop him in B tier next to La Habrea. Yeah, I'm happy with that. And now it's time to hear from one of our friends of the channel through our Patreon members. Thank you so much for putting your tier lists in, and we're going to start with Defesh, who is pretty new to the Patreon. Thank you so much for joining in with that. Now, there's a few disagreements I have here, predominantly how high you've put Bakul Jaja and how low you've put Elidibus. That one hurts me in my soul, but I kind of love how high you've put Teleji. Speaking of Stormblood, we haven't actually discussed anyone from that expansion yet thinking about it, so let's talk about some other characters from that, namely Fordula, Yotsuyu, and Asahi, who I'm classing separately from Fandaniel as they are basically different characters. Fordula is an odd one because, to be honest, for the longest time, I just found her really irritating and kind of dull, and I think she plays a big part in the Stormblood story that people just didn't find all that interesting with Alamigo, myself included. So really, she should just be cannon fodder. And yet, as time's gone on, I actually think I really like Fordula. Not because of recent developments in the game or anything, but just because my mind on her has changed over time. She's a traitor to her people, she's captured Kryl, she's a sycophant to Zenos, her powers as a resonant aren't particularly interesting, and yet that one cutscene where she's explaining what happened to her father still just tugs on my heartstrings for some reason, and I've grown to really like Fordula over time, so I'm actually going to put her even B tier, even though I think others would probably put her a bit lower. Yotsuyu, on the other hand, I think is extremely popular and kind of hits a lot of the same beats that Fordula does, just better. You feel sympathy for her because of the way her family treats her, but you question how much sympathy you feel for her because the things she does are pretty horrendous. She's also sycophantic to Zenos, but not in the same way. It's hard to explain quite why Yotsuyu is so engaging, other to say that she's just serving. Everyone likes a badass lady in the villain spot, and she just hits the mark on every count there. I also think that the entire Tsukuyomi story arc is the best part of Stormblood, and Yotsuyu is at the center of it. Her relationship with Gosetsu, as well as herself or her other self, is intriguing, and her relationship to Asahi is a sight to behold. A tier for Yotsuyu. Yeah, I reckon A tier for her. Asahi, actually, also gonna go in A tier, and I'll tell you why. I hated this character from the second I saw him to the second he went down like the little bitch he is after Tsukuyomi. And that feeling of loathing is a hallmark of a strong villain. You don't have to feel sympathy or empathy for a character for them to be well written. They just have to evoke a strong feeling out of the player. And Asahi absolutely does that. He's petulant, he's arrogant, he's loathsome, he's even more sycophantic than the others. He's just repugnant, and that makes me love hating him. If anything, I'm just sad we didn't get to finish him off ourselves. Well, not as Asahi anyway. I suppose after talking about Asahi, it makes sense to move over to Fandaniel now in that case. Hermes, Fandaniel, Amon, whatever you want to call him, Fandaniel's actions arguably have the most repercussions in all of Final Fantasy XIV, creating Meteion, causing the Sundering to happen because of the final days, manipulating the Allagan Empire. There's a lot to feast on with Fandaniel, and yet I can't help but think that he lacks a sense of presence that the better villains in Final Fantasy XIV have. He kinda signals the parts of Endwalker I just find to be a little bit trite. I really love the story for Endwalker, don't get me wrong, it had me bawling on multiple occasions, but on reflection, I feel like Fandaniel is a source of a lot of the game's problems, but makes them anticlimactic in the end. Zodiac was built up over 10 years, and Fandaniel steals his body and makes him the mid-boss of the expansion, which is why Zodiac doesn't have an entry of his own on this list. He works with Zenos and Garlemald to make it look like the most tense thing that's about to happen. He might kill one of the Scions, and then it just doesn't happen. I'm still gonna put Fandaniel in A tier just because the magnitude of what he does is huge for Final Fantasy XIV as a whole. I just wish he'd done a bit better of the presentation of it all, that's all. And here is where my big fat hot take is gonna sit that's probably gonna get me in trouble with Final Fantasy XIV fans the world over. I don't think Meteion is any bigger than a B tier character at best. I just feel that for a story that's been built up over a decade, where Zodiac and Hydaelyn are these majestic beings built up for years, having a character like Meteion turn up right at the end to steal everyone's thunder with next to no lead up toward her prior to the Elpis section of the game just takes me out. It's like saying Necron is the best villain in Final Fantasy IX. Well, okay, alright, maybe it's not quite that bad, but you get what I'm saying. Meteion just feels like such a rug pull, a deus ex machina, that I can't love her or feel much for her in general like a lot of people do, and I'm honestly convinced that if she weren't an adorable little girl with blue head wings, other people wouldn't either. They nailed the character design with Meteion, 100%, and the entire Ultima Thule section of Endwalker is brilliantly done. I wouldn't take that away from anyone. But did she have the same impact as the villains in A or S tier so far have had on me? Even Asahi? No, she didn't. So, sorry, B tier is where she's going. Time for another Patreon list, this one belonging to Luca Yasha, who I've played 14 with pretty much since I started playing it, so thank you for this. I'm kinda stunned by a couple of the entries on your list, to be honest, namely how high you've put Ranjit, Golbez, and even Vorthri, and you've put Meteion in C tier, and there was me thinking I was harsh. Okay, let's finish up the Endwalker villains by talking about Zenos. Now, I'm going to double down on my hot takes here, and I'm sure people are going to rake me over the coals for liking Zenos over Meteion. But I do, and it's my list, so tough. I can at least back up why. Zenos is the only character in the entire story whose story revolves entirely around you, the Warrior of Light. His entire reason for being, his drive, centers entirely around the player. All of the villains, other than Zenos, have their own agendas, and you're an obstacle getting in the way of their greater schemes. You're an unfortunate circumstance that causes their plan not to happen. That's not the case with Zenos. You're the reason he's tearing down the rest of the world. You're his entire ethos. His obsession is with you. You're both saving the world and the reason that it's in danger, because Zenos won't rest until he's beaten you. You can't understand him because there's nothing to be understood. Similar to Kefka in Final Fantasy VI, which is what makes him terrifying. It helps that I've always been a fan of the unbeatable boss enemy that some games have, provided it doesn't get overused, and even in this list it gets overused sometimes. But at least with Zenos it makes sense. You fight him first in Alamigo and you get absolutely ruined by him, which works well because you've been basically unstoppable up until that point. So you kind of get checked for your cockiness. And then you fight him at the end of Endwalker. By the time you've done that, he's the culmination of everything the player has overcome. You're now able to beat the thing you never could. I consider Zenos to be an S tier character, which I know is a hot take. Don't get me wrong, he's not up there with Emet-Selch, because not many characters in any video game is, let's be honest, but it's almost irrelevant how much Zenos as a character resonates with you, because it doesn't actually matter who he is. What matters is the polarizing force to the player he represents. Let's dial it back and go to Heavensward and discuss some of the characters we find there, and I'll start with Thordan the Seventh. Now, Thordan's a character that I've always found to be a bit basic amongst the innumerable FF14 villains. Some would say the same with Zenos, and that's fair enough, but I just see him a bit differently. Thordan, on the other hand, doesn't really accomplish a whole lot, wanting to stand above the rest in power in the wake of the Dragonsong War. Sure, he's got some story with Emmerich, and the Knights of the Round Nods are brilliant in the boss fight with him, and his bloodline certainly has a lot going on when it comes to Nidhogg, but as a character by himself, I'm not so sure. Realistically, I think the only reason that people really remember much of Thordan at all is Haurchefant. Now, Haurchefant wasn't killed by Thordan himself though, just caught in the crossfire by one of his knights. It's a very sad scene, one of many people's favourites in the entire Final Fantasy XIV story, which is totally fair, but Thordan's involvement in that is circumstantial at best. I personally think Thordan's kinda weak, so I'm putting him in C tier. I'm going to continue by talking about the meat of the Dragonsong War now, and I'm going to start with Ysayle because I think she's actually very easy to place. As a villain, Ysayle is D tier. As a character, Ysayle is much higher. I really love her. I love Shiva, I love her relationship with Hrisvelga, I love the whole shebang. But as a villain, she's nothing more than a nuisance. She's a much better character when she's on our side, much more memorable that way. Nidhogg, on the other hand, I think is a great villain. Nidhogg has every reason to hate humanity, dating back to his clash with the original Thordan, further amplifying my feelings on Thordan 7th, by the way, and his story not only resonates with a player because of their relationship with Hrisvelga and Dragonkind versus humanity, but with a more intimate one with Estinian, who is still a fan favourite today. So it's the differing scales of Nidhogg's story, there you go, scale, see what I did there, dragon, scales, ranging from the smallest detail to the wider coverage of the game overall is why I think he's so strong on this list. He also has some brilliant boss fights attached to him, whether it be with himself or while he has Estinian possessed, so I can't put Nidhogg any lower than A, I just think he's great. Time for another Patreon member list, this one from Karan, an old colleague of mine I still bond with over Final Fantasy XIV, so thank you so much for this. I can agree with the majority of your list here, at least from the perspective of thinking this is where most people would put these guys. I am, however, shocked at how low you've put Teleji. I really like that little devil, and you've called him forgettable. I think here is where we could perform some cleanup with some of the more minor villains, even if they don't look like they should be minor. Ranjit I found to be a really boring character throughout all of Shadowbringers. One of the only characters I felt that way about in that expansion. You know how I said that I liked the unbeatable boss mechanic when it's not overdone? Yeah, Ranjit would be an example of what I mean when it's not done correctly. And at the end of the day, all he gave me was thug. So into D tier you go. He's the mid-boss for a mid-boss. Ilberd has glimpses of being a brilliant character. I think the Crystal Brave story arc is actually really underrated. Again, probably should have put Lolorito in this list thinking back about it, particularly for fans of Alphino, as it's the pivotal moment for him in which he turns over a new leaf, and Ilberd plays a big part in that. And let's not forget that he's the cause of what happened to Papalymo, and that his summoning of Shinryu had repercussions for a long time to come. I actually think he'd be a B tier character if we got a bit more of him, but his motives always seemed a bit naff, so without the explanation that we would have liked to have gotten for him, I'm going to put him in C tier. Calyx is difficult to place because we know so little about him given how new he is to the story. Now this video is made when the most recent story patch is 7.3, and I'll admit up until this point I haven't really latched onto him as a character just yet, especially considering that it seems like his role is that of a subordinate, but I'm willing to wait and see where that goes, but for now I'm going to pop him in C tier. Nero is barely a villain. Sure, he's a big part of the Garlean Empire, but his story is entirely tied to Cid Garland, so how much you care about Nero comes down to how much you care about Cid. And Cid's a fine character, but he's far from a favourite for me, so his boyfriend can sit in C tier for me. Varys also goes in C tier, and I really don't like putting him there because he should have been so much more interesting than it turned out he was going to be. He did get a trial to himself eventually, and it was pretty tough at the time, but it was also kind of shoved to the side and forgotten about from a narrative perspective. I wanted to like him a lot, certainly more after the peace talks meeting with the Scions went awry, but I just felt that Varys' role just became more and more distant over time, despite the fact that they were kind of building him up and then not putting him on the screen. It was weird. And as soon as Zenos turned up, he just got completely relegated to obscurity and then offed basically off screen or in a cutscene that looked like it should have had a lot more impact than it did. But you didn't really care about Varys by the time that happened. So yeah, C tier, I'm afraid. I'm going to be honest with you, I have not played Final Fantasy XIV during its legacy days in 1.0. So while I have put Nail in this list, that's more for people who did play it so that they can put their opinions forward that include her. So my opinion of her comes solely from the Bahamut raids, which I very much enjoyed her in, but never got to see her full potential. And that is side content, which I said I was trying to avoid when it came to this list. So I'm going to put her in C tier just because of the cool factor alone, but I'd love to know where others would put her. This guest list actually comes from a fellow content creator, Kiza, who has kindly contributed their tier list for FF14 villains. I think my main shock here is how high you've got Nabriales and Iyorm. I wasn't expecting anyone to have Nabriales over Gaius, I must admit. And if you'd like to check out Kiza's content, be sure to find him on every platform as Kiza creates. Golbez actively aggravates me because I felt from the start of the first time we saw him that having him as a Final Fantasy XIV villain in the main story rather than as a fan service character like Kefka, Gabranth, or Cloud of Darkness was a mistake. I can't help but feel like his story arc along with Zero's belonged in a trial story similar to Sorrows of Werlei and would have been much better received because of it. His entire role is to serve Zero's, I don't know, Cecil moment, I suppose you'd call it, and it feels dragged out for the sake of it. So I genuinely just dislike Golbez in 14. So D tier is going to be your placement. You should have just stayed in FF4 if you ask me. Vor3 is actually a brilliant example of a mid-boss in Shadowbringers, certainly a better one than Ranji. And as I've said a few times, what I want from my characters is a strong evocation of feeling, regardless of what that feeling actually is. And in Vor3's case, it's disgust. Vor3 is vile, not just to look at, but in his behavior as well, essentially bringing the story of Soylent Green to Final Fantasy XIV, but there's an element of sympathy for Vor3, as the poor sod never stood a chance due to Emet-Selch's tampering when he was born. It also helps that when I first saw his transformation into Innocence, I was obsessed with the design, so I don't think he deserves A tier or anything, but he's definitely a solid BB+. I'd debate putting him in A tier, because I do think that he's a really good example of what he is, but can I put him over Meteion, who is kind of my benchmark for B tier or things that go above it? No, I don't think so. I'm happy they leave him in B. That just leaves 3. We're getting there. So I'm going to start with the most recent one, Sphene. Well, Queen Sphene anyway. When I first saw Sphene, or actually when I first saw the area that Sphene came from, Alexandria, I was hesitant from the offset, given how ham-fisted I felt Golbez's inclusion was in Endwalker, given that Sphene is a manifestation of Final Fantasy IX's Garnet, and 9 is my favourite game in the series, so I'd have been really upset if they'd messed that storyline up. I certainly don't think Sphene is a bad character per se, and I understand that she has strong motives, using the lives of those in the Source to sustain the Endless, and showcasing how desperate she is to fulfill what she feels is her duty to her people at any cost, unable to let go, which has relatable aspects in real life, and yet I just never really found this story arc all that engaging, nor did I particularly like her boss fight, which saddens me considering the source material. I think that other players probably do resonate with Queen Sphene more than I did, and I firmly believe she's the strongest antagonist in Dawntrail, so I can't put her in C tier in good conscience, given that she'd be sharing a tier with Zoralja, which just doesn't sit right with me, so I'll put her in B tier, because I do think she's better than he is. Gaius van Baelsar is another character that's really difficult to place, because had we only seen him in A Realm Reborn, he'd be a C tier, possibly even D tier character. He brought us some of the most iconic lines in the game, but for all the wrong reasons. I didn't even put his lieutenants Livia and Rittertin in this list because they play such a small role in the story, and because this video is already long enough as it is. However, Unlike a lot of the other characters in A Realm Reborn, Gaius was given a chance for real redemption in Shadowbringers. It's really hard to ignore quite how good a character Gaius is in Sorrows of Werelight, which is side content, but Gaius's reappearance does predate that in the lead up to Shadowbringers when you encounter him in the Burn, and it all just culminates in one of the best redemption stories Final Fantasy XIV has to offer. So there's nowhere I could put him in any tier below A, even though I'm kind of breaking my own rules to do it. So you can take that one as you will. And then our last guest list for the day comes from Patreon members Chamberlain Skeksis. I'd love to feature all you guys' lists and I'm super grateful. Let me know in the comments if you'd like to see more of everybody else's lists as well as my own. Your list actually isn't all that dissimilar to mine looking at it, except for how differently you've placed Varys, but that I can understand. But I am kind of shocked that you have Asahi up there in S tier. I love the guy, I had him in A tier, but next to Elidibus and Emet-Selch, I don't know about that. That just leaves one character left, and I'm going to be real with you. This is my single favorite character in all of Final Fantasy XIV, villain or otherwise. And yes, I am saying this above even Emet-Selch, as much as I respect that he'd have a tier to himself if I wanted to add an extra one. But the character that spoke to me most, and therefore the last entry into the S tier for me, is Elidibus. Now, this wasn't always true for me. Elidibus is such an intriguing character to me personally because he's the only character I can think of in recent memory that has changed how I look at characters in general inherently. I found Elidibus excruciatingly dull when he first started appearing in A Realm Reborn. His cutscenes were some of the ones I skipped, being brutally honest. I just had no interest in him whatsoever and almost groaned audibly whenever he appeared in future expansions. When he started the Warriors of Darkness arc in Heavensward, didn't really care. When he took over Zenos' body in Stormblood, didn't really care then either. Then Shadowbringers happened and everything changed. I started noticing the change in my view of Elidibus at the end of 5.2 in the lead up to the big one, but I was not prepared for the overwhelming feels I was about to get in 5.3, which in my opinion is the single best patch Final Fantasy XIV has ever had. In one fell swoop, the trial against Elidibus as the Warrior of Light is my favorite fight in the game. The theme track, the To the Edge, is perfection and had me absolutely bawling my eyes out when I went to Final Fantasy XIV FanFest a couple years ago. The outpouring of Elidibus' true intentions and his point of view, which is one of loneliness and a yearning for a reunion with ones he loves, even if he doesn't understand why, which is a beautiful contrast to that of Emet-Selch, and that one line. That one goddamn line.
The rains have ceased, and we have been graced with another beautiful day. But you are not here to see it.
Killed me. Absolutely ruined me. So much so that I went back and I chastised myself for not paying more attention earlier, and it made me love him even more. Now, I don't think that many players would have Elidibus in even close to the same caliber as Emet-Selch, but I do, and it's a purely personal reason. I do just want to give a quick shout out to Megiddo in my community for helping me find all of the cutscenes that feature all the villains I'll talk about today. This video took a long time to make, but it would have taken a lot longer without your help, so sending you all the loves. Thank you very much. So there you have it. That was my tier list for the villains of Final Fantasy XIV. It's been a long one, but I'm happy with this, I think. I'm sure plenty of people will disagree with me, but that's part of the fun. So by all means, post your own version of this tier list using the link in the description box, and a big thank you to everyone for posting their tier list within this video. And if you'd like a title card made especially for you and to be involved in future videos like this one, then be sure to check out the Patreon link in the description box below. What would you like to see in the future in terms of tier lists from me? More Final Fantasy XIV? I've actually noticed that a lot of Final Fantasy XIV fans haven't played many of the other Final Fantasy games, and that's true vice versa. But not me. I'm apparently way too deep into this rabbit hole. But maybe you'd like to hear about a different franchise. Zelda, Kingdom Hearts, Dragon Quest, Street Fighter. I've played a lot of video games in my time, so please do let me know what tier lists you'd like to see in the future, and like the video and subscribe to the channel if you've enjoyed what you've seen here today. Thank you ever so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Take care.